So here's the thing about the Galactic Combat Federation. They take themselves very, very seriously. Picture the most pretentious sports organization you can imagine, then multiply that by about 10,000 and give them control over interstellar broadcasting rights. Every cycle, they host the Grand Championship, where each species sends their absolute best warrior to compete for the title of Supreme Combat Entity of the known galaxy. It's basically the Olympics. If the Olympics involved significantly more death and significantly better merchandising deals. For the past 3 centuries, that title had belonged to one being. Krexthor the Unbreakable, champion of the Zephyrian Empire. This guy was everything you'd expect from a galactic champion. 8 feet tall, muscles that had muscles, 4 arms, each capable of wielding weapons that could level city blocks. He'd spent literally 300 years preparing for combat. 300 years. That's longer than most human civilizations have existed, and this guy spent it all doing push-ups and practicing his intimidating stare in the mirror. Krexthor had never lost a fight, not once. He'd defeated the crystalline assassins of Vega Prime, who could phase through solid matter. He'd beaten the psychic warlords of the Mentalist Collective, who could literally read your moves before you made them. He'd even conquered the mechanical dreadnoughts of Sector 7, which were basically walking tanks with anger management issues. The betting pools across the galaxy had stopped taking wagers on whether Krexthor would win. The only bets now were on how quickly he'd finish off his opponents. The current record was 12 seconds, set against a warrior who had the unfortunate strategy of challenging Krexthor to an arm wrestling contest. Then Earth sent in their registration form. Now, you have to understand, most galactic citizens had barely heard of Earth. We were what you might charitably call a developing civilization. We'd just figured out faster than light travel, we still thought reality TV was entertainment, and our most advanced weapons were roughly equivalent to what the rest of the galaxy used for children's toys. The general consensus was that humans were a quaint little species that would probably blow themselves up within a few centuries, saving everyone else the trouble. So when the Combat Federation received Earth's entry, complete with registration fees paid in what appeared to be cryptocurrency and gift cards, the reaction was, let's call it mixed. Some species found it adorable, like watching a toddler try to arm wrestle a professional bodybuilder. Others found it deeply concerning, because surely no species could be stupid enough to send a warrior against Krexthor without some kind of secret weapon. The betting odds on the human contestant were 50,000 to 1, and that was considered generous. Dave Martinez stepped off the transport shuttle looking exactly like what he was, a 42-year-old IT support specialist from Cleveland who'd rather be literally anywhere else. He was wearing khakis, a polo shirt that had seen better decades, and the expression of a man who'd just spent 3 days in hyperspace eating nothing but airline peanuts and questioning his life choices. "Excuse me," Dave said to the nearest Federation official, a 7-foot-tall insectoid creature with way too many eyes. "Do you know if there's a Starbucks around here? And maybe some Advil? The jump from Earth gave me a headache that feels like my brain is trying to escape through my ears." The official, whose name was apparently Bozic according to his name tag, just stared. All 14 of his eyes blinked in sequence, which was either a sign of confusion or the beginning of some kind of seizure. Meanwhile, the other contestants were doing what serious warriors do before a life-or-death competition. Vexandra the Soul Reaper was floating in a meditation pod, channeling the dark energies of her ancestors. Gormand Ironthews was bench-pressing what appeared to be a small spacecraft. The cybernetic nightmare known only as Unit 247 was running diagnostics on its 17 different weapon systems, each beep sounding like a death knell. And Dave was asking about the Wi-Fi password. "Look," Dave explained to Bazik, pulling out his smartphone. "I've got about 47 unread emails from work, and if I don't respond to at least half of them, my boss is going to assume I'm dead, which, to be fair, might not be far from the truth after this whole tournament thing." This caught the attention of commentator Blax, a floating jellyfish-like creature whose job was to provide color commentary for the billions of viewers across the galaxy. Blax had covered every major combat event for the past century, and he'd never seen anything quite like this. "Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary energy beings," Blix announced into his broadcast relay, "I'm here with what can only be described as the most unusual contestant in Federation history. Tell me, human Dave, what's your training regiment?" Dave looked up from his phone. "Training regiment? Oh, well, I do IT support, so I guess you could say I'm used to dealing with problems that shouldn't exist but somehow do. Does that count?" Admiral Thornwick, the Federation's head of security, was watching this exchange from the observation deck with the kind of expression usually reserved for natural disasters. "Blix," he said into his communicator, "please tell me this human has some kind of secret combat expertise we don't know about." "Well, Admiral," Blix replied, watching Dave struggle with the station's automatic doors, "he just asked me if there's a tutorial mode for the tournament, so I'm going to say no." Down in the preparation area, Krexthor was beginning his pre-combat meditation, a sacred ritual passed down through generations of Zephyrian warriors. It involved 3 hours of spiritual cleansing, 2 hours of weapon blessing, and 1 hour of intimidating himself in the mirror while reciting the names of his fallen enemies. Dave, meanwhile, had discovered the vending machines. 6 hours before the fight, Krexthor began what the Zephyrines called the Ritual of Inevitable Victory. This was serious business, folks. We're talking about a ceremony so elaborate it had its own documentary series and a line of collectible figurines. First came the cleansing of past defeats, where Krexthor had to meditate on every warrior he'd ever killed, thanking them for the privilege of ending their existence. This took about 2 hours, mainly because the list was really long. Then came the blessing of weapons, where each of his 17 ceremonial blades had to be individually consecrated with the tears of his enemies. Yes, they actually collected tears for this. The Zephyrian Empire had an entire department dedicated to enemy tear harvesting. Their tax forms were probably fascinating. Finally, there was the communion with battle spirits, where Krexthor would enter a trance state and receive wisdom from the ghosts of ancient warriors. Mostly they told him to hit things harder and aim for the head, but tradition is tradition. Dave's preparation ritual was slightly different. "Hey, do you guys have turkey sandwiches?" he asked the cafeteria worker, a pleasant slug-like creature named Glorbex. "And maybe some of those little bags of chips? I haven't eaten since the transport and I get cranky when I'm hungry." Glorbex, who'd been working the Federation cafeteria for 30 years and had seen every type of warrior imaginable, had never encountered a contestant who cared more about lunch meat than their imminent death. "We have the processed protein substitute shaped like your Earthbird," Glorbex replied, helpfully. "Close enough," Dave said, checking his watch. "Oh, and do you have any of those energy drinks? Not because I need energy for fighting or anything, I just haven't slept since Tuesday and I'm running on fumes here." While Dave was debating between mayo and mustard, the rest of the galaxy was tuning in for what was being billed as the most lopsided massacre in combat Federation history. The viewership numbers were astronomical. Even species that had never heard of humans were watching, mostly to see what a real-life cartoon death looked like. Commentator Blix was in his element. "Beings across the galaxy, we are now just hours away from what promises to be the shortest championship fight in Federation history. Krexthor the Unbreakable has spent the day in sacred preparation, while his human opponent has spent it asking maintenance staff if they know how to get mustard stains out of polo shirts." Admiral Thornwick was reviewing the emergency medical protocols when his aide approached with a concerned expression. "Sir, the human requested something called Netflix access in his quarters. When we explained we don't have that service, he asked if anyone had downloaded any movies to their personal devices." "Movies?" Thornwick asked. "Apparently he wanted to watch something called The Office before the fight. He said it helps him relax." Back in the cafeteria, Dave had finally secured his turkey sandwich and was now browsing the station's gift shop, because apparently even intergalactic combat tournaments need merchandising. He picked up a coffee mug that read, "My friend went to the Combat Federation Championships and all I got was this lousy mug. And severe emotional trauma." "Perfect," Dave said to himself. "My coworker Janet loves weird mugs." The fight was in 30 minutes, and Dave Martinez was shopping for souvenirs. The Grand Combat Arena was a masterpiece of intimidation architecture. Picture the Colosseum, but designed by someone with serious anger issues and access to anti-gravity technology. 50,000 spectators from across the galaxy had packed into the floating stadium, while billions more watched from home, work, or whatever passed for recreational facilities in their respective star systems. Krexthor's entrance was everything you'd expect from a warrior who'd spent 3 centuries perfecting the art of looking absolutely terrifying. The arena floor split open like the gates of hell, and up rose a platform wreathed in ceremonial smoke and the screams of his previous victims, which the sound engineers had thoughtfully recorded for maximum dramatic effect. Krexthor stood 8 feet tall in his ancestral battle armor, forged from the bones of the first warriors he defeated. His 4 arms each held a different weapon: the blade of eternal sorrow, the mace of crushing despair, the spear of inevitable death, and a backup sword in case things got really messy. The crowd went absolutely insane. This was their champion, their unstoppable force of nature, their guarantee that the universe still made sense. Then the other entrance opened, and Dave Martinez walked in mid-bite of his turkey sandwich. He was still wearing his polo shirt, still had his name tag from the IT conference he'd attended 3 weeks ago. The only concession he'd made to the whole Mortal Kombat thing was that he'd tucked his shirt in, and even that looked like an accident. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted energy beings," commentator Blykes announced, his voice cracking slightly, "I present Dave Martinez of Earth, who is apparently going to finish his lunch before we start." Dave looked around the arena with the expression of a man who just realized he'd walked into the wrong conference room, but was too polite to leave. He took another bite of his sandwich, chewed thoughtfully, and then noticed the 50,000 aliens staring at him in complete silence. "Oh," Dave said into the microphone that had automatically descended to his height. "Hey everyone, nice turnout. Is this being live-streamed? Because if it is, I should probably mention that the views expressed here are my own, and don't represent my employer." Krexthor raised the blade of eternal sorrow and let out a war cry that had been known to shatter glass from 3 star systems away. It was a sound that spoke of ancient battles, of worlds conquered, of enemies crushed beneath the weight of inevitable defeat. Dave's response was to check his watch and mutter, "Wow, okay, somebody's excited." The opening bell rang, which was less of a bell and more of a psychic scream that resonated through every being's consciousness. Krexthor launched himself forward with the grace of a predator and the speed of a hypersonic missile. His 4 weapons moved in perfect harmony, each strike calculated to remove a different piece of Dave's anatomy. Dave, meanwhile, was trying to figure out where to put his sandwich so it wouldn't get dirty. The first clash should have been over in milliseconds. Krexthor's centuries of training, his perfect technique, his overwhelming physical superiority, it should have been like watching a freight train hit a paper airplane. Instead, something absolutely bizarre happened. Dave, in his attempt to find a clean surface for his sandwich, accidentally ducked under the blade of eternal sorrow. While straightening up, he bumped into Krexthor's 3rd arm, causing the spear of inevitable death to go wide. Then, in a move that would be analyzed by combat experts for decades, Dave did something that no warrior in the history of the Federation had ever attempted. He apologized. "Oh, sorry about that," Dave said, steadying Krexthor's arm. "Did I mess up your thing? You looked like you had a whole choreography planned out." Krexthor stopped mid-swing, all 4 weapons frozen in place. In 300 years of combat, no one had ever apologized to him during a fight. Warriors had begged for mercy, sure. They'd screamed threats, proclaimed vengeance, or occasionally wet themselves in terror, but apologize for interfering with his attack technique? What? Krexthor said, his voice processing through the arena's translator systems. "Your sword work," Dave continued, taking another bite of his sandwich. "It looked really complicated, very impressive. How long did it take you to learn all that spinning stuff?" And just like that, the psychological warfare had begun. Except Dave had no idea he was doing it. What happened next would be studied in military academies across 17 different star systems, not because it was brilliant, but because it was so fundamentally wrong that it somehow became right. Krexthor, thrown completely off balance by Dave's casual politeness, attempted to recover with his signature move, the whirlwind of certain doom. This was a devastating attack pattern that involved all 4 arms spinning in a synchronized dance of death, creating a literal tornado of razor-sharp metal. It had never failed. Ever. Dave, meanwhile, was squinting at something behind Krexthor's left shoulder. "Hey, is that a fire exit?" Dave asked, pointing with his sandwich. "Because I'm pretty sure that door isn't up to code. The sign's barely visible from here and there's no emergency lighting. Someone could get seriously hurt if there's an evacuation." Krexthor's perfect spinning technique faltered. In 3 centuries of combat, no opponent had ever stopped mid-fight to discuss building safety regulations. The whirlwind of certain doom became more of a light breeze of mild confusion. "What are you talking about?" Krexthor demanded, his weapons still spinning but with noticeably less enthusiasm. "OSHA violations," Dave explained, as if this was perfectly obvious. "Occupational Safety and Health Administration. You guys have something like that, right? Because this whole arena setup is basically a lawsuit waiting to happen. I mean, those floating platforms don't even have guardrails." Commentator Blix was frantically trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. "Beings of the galaxy, I've covered combat sports for over a century, and I can honestly say I have no idea what's happening right now. The human appears to be conducting some kind of safety inspection while our champion experiences what can only be described as an existential crisis." Admiral Thornwick was leaning so far forward in his observation booth that his aide was genuinely concerned he might fall out. Is he actually fighting or just having a conversation? Dave took another bite of his sandwich and continued his impromptu consultation. And another thing, do you guys have workers' compensation insurance? Because swinging those heavy weapons around all day has got to be murder on your shoulders. Have you considered ergonomic handles? This was too much for Krexthor, the greatest warrior in galactic history, the unbreakable champion of the Zephian Empire, was receiving unsolicited workplace advice from his opponent. He let out a roar of frustration and charged forward with the spear of inevitable death, putting every ounce of his 300-year training into one perfect, unstoppable thrust. Dave sidestepped it while reaching into his pocket. Not because he saw it coming, not because of some hidden martial arts training or secret human combat instinct. He sidestepped because his phone was buzzing, and he'd developed the reflex of any modern office worker to immediately check their notifications, regardless of current circumstances. "Oh, sorry," Dave said, glancing at his phone screen while Krexthor's spear buried itself 3 feet into the arena wall. "My boss just sent me a text, asking if I remembered to update the server passwords before I left. Classic Mike, you know? Guy couldn't remember his own birthday, but somehow never forgets about password protocols." Krexthor was now stuck. The spear of inevitable death was lodged so firmly in the wall that it would take several minutes and possibly some heavy machinery to extract it. This had never happened before, because in 3 centuries of combat, no opponent had ever been so completely indifferent to his attacks that they'd casually moved out of the way while checking their text messages. "You want some help with that?" Dave offered, finishing the last bite of his sandwich and finally giving Krexthor his full attention. "I'm pretty good with stuck things. You'd be amazed how often the office printer jams." That's when Krexthor made his fatal mistake. Overwhelmed by frustration, confusion, and a growing sense that the universe no longer made sense, he abandoned his centuries of training and did something no Zephyrian warrior had ever done in the heat of battle. He asked for help. Yes, Krexthor said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I would like some help." Dave walked over, examined the stuck spear with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years dealing with malfunctioning office equipment, and gave it a little wiggle. "Yeah. See, your problem is you put too much force behind it. Sometimes you've got to finesse these things." He showed Krexthor the proper technique, a gentle back-and-forth motion combined with a slight upward pressure. The spear of inevitable death popped free like a piece of toast from a toaster. "There you go," Dave said, handing the weapon back to its owner. "Good as new." Krexthor took his spear back, looked at it, looked at Dave, looked at the 50,000 spectators who were sitting in stunned silence, and then did something that would echo through galactic history. He sat down on the arena floor and started crying. Not the noble tears of a defeated warrior, but the confused, overwhelmed sobs of someone whose entire worldview had just collapsed. For 300 years, his life had been about combat, about victory, about being the strongest. And this human, this perfectly ordinary, sandwich-eating, phone-checking human, had just treated him like a coworker with a minor technical problem. Dave, displaying the same emotional intelligence that made him surprisingly effective at IT support, sat down next to him. "Hey, you okay there, buddy?" Dave asked. "Rough day?" And that's when the arena's automated victory detection system, confused by the fact that both fighters were now sitting peacefully on the ground, having what appeared to be a therapy session, made an executive decision. The victory horn sounded. Dave Martinez of Earth was declared the winner by technical knockout? Emotional breakthrough? The system's databases didn't have a category for this. Dave looked up at the scoreboard displaying his name in massive holographic letters and shrugged. "Huh," he said. "Would you look at that?" The silence that followed Dave's victory lasted exactly 14 seconds, which was coincidentally the same amount of time it took for 50,000 galactic spectators to collectively process that they had just witnessed the impossible. Then the noise started. It wasn't cheering. It wasn't booing. It was the sound of an entire galaxy's understanding of reality undergoing emergency maintenance. Commentator Blocks, whose job required him to have something intelligent to say about everything, found himself completely speechless for the first time in his century-long career. His jellyfish-like form pulsated frantically as he struggled to find words that could adequately describe what had just happened. That is to say, Blix finally managed, his voice reaching approximately 3 billion viewers across the known galaxy. Ladies, gentlemen, and quantum entities, I believe we have just witnessed the most unprecedented upset in the history of organized combat. Dave Martinez of Earth has defeated Krexthor the Unbreakable by being nice to him. Down in the arena, reporters from every major news network in the galaxy were scrambling to get the first interview with the new champion. They approached Dave with the reverence usually reserved for religious figures, or beings who had just achieved the impossible, which, to be fair, he had. "Champion Martinez," began Zixandra Newsweaver from Galactic Sports Network, her 12 eyes focusing intently on Dave while her recording tendrils captured every word. "The galaxy wants to know, what was your secret strategy? How did you know that psychological warfare would be effective against an opponent who had trained for 3 centuries? Dave looked at her with the expression of a man who had just been asked to explain quantum physics using only breakfast cereal analogies. "Strategy?" Dave said, checking his watch again. "I wasn't using a strategy, I was just trying to be polite. My mom raised me to be nice to people, even when they're pointing sharp objects at me, although, to be honest, that second part doesn't usually come up in customer service." The reporter's recording tendrils stopped moving. Across the galaxy, beings who had wagered their life savings on Krexthor began to experience what economists would later classify as existential financial despair. Meanwhile, Krexthor was still sitting on the arena floor, but his tears had stopped. Dave's casual kindness had triggered something the warrior hadn't experienced in 3 centuries: genuine human connection. For the first time since he'd begun his training as a child, Krexthor was thinking about something other than combat. "You know," Krexthor said to Dave, his voice now calm and contemplative, "I haven't had a real conversation with anyone in over 200 years. Everyone's always either trying to kill me or worshipping me from a distance. It gets pretty lonely." "Yeah, that sounds rough," Dave replied with the easy sympathy of someone who'd spent years dealing with frustrated people in tech support. "Have you considered taking up a hobby? Maybe something that doesn't involve weapons?" Admiral Thornwick, watching this exchange from his observation booth, turned to his aide with the expression of a man whose orderly universe had just been replaced with something from a surrealist painting. "Send a message to Earth immediately," Thornwick said. "We need to know if they have more like him." The victory ceremony that followed was unlike anything in Federation history. Traditionally, the new champion would give a speech about honor, glory, and the thrill of victory while standing over the broken body of their defeated opponent. Instead, Dave Martinez stood at the podium, looking like he'd rather be literally anywhere else, while Krexthor sat in the front row taking notes on a pamphlet about community college courses. Hi everyone," Dave began, tapping the microphone to make sure it was working. "I guess I won? That's unexpected. I'd like to thank my mom for teaching me to be polite, my boss Mike for giving me the time off even though he definitely didn't want to, and whoever designed this station's vending machines because they actually had pretty decent snacks." He paused, looking out at the sea of alien faces staring at him with mixtures of awe, confusion, and mild terror. "I know you're all probably wondering about my training secrets or whatever, but honestly, I just treat fighting like I treat everything else in my life. I try not to take it too seriously. I remember that everyone's just doing their best, and I always keep snacks handy because you never know when you're going to get hungry." The applause that followed was polite but bewildered, like the sound of people clapping for a magic trick they didn't understand. After the ceremony, Dave managed to catch the next shuttle back to Earth, declining offers of endorsement deals, movie rights, and a surprisingly lucrative proposal to become the official spokesperson for a line of breakfast cereals called Champion Chunks. 3 months later, Dave Martinez was back at his desk in Cleveland, explaining to a coworker why their computer kept freezing every time they tried to open more than 3 browser tabs at once. The Save the Galaxy thing had become just another story he told at office parties, right between the time he got food poisoning in Vegas and the time he accidentally replied all to a company-wide email. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey Dave, it's Krexthor. Just finished my first pottery class. Thanks again for the life advice. The galaxy is weird without constant combat, but in a good way. Hope your printer problems are minimal." Dave smiled, sent back a thumbs-up emoji, and returned to explaining why turning it off and on again really does fix most problems. Some things, apparently, are universal.